Welcome to Evolving Digital Literacy in Early Childhood. My name is Melissa Cleaver, and I'm the Common Sense Education Outreach Manager, Nebraska. Just as a quick reminder, everybody, this conversation is being posted on our Common Sense Education YouTube channel, along with all the links and resources that we're going to be talking about and sharing today. So be sure to follow along with our Common Sense Education YouTube channel. And Common Sense and myself are so happy to be welcoming our guest today. This is Jorja Brazda-Witters. She's our coordinator for early childhood in Omaha Public Schools. And this is especially exciting since we know that April is kicking off Week of the Young Child in about 2 weeks, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
Next week, actually.
Next week. Okay, time's just flying too quickly for us. So, yeah. So, Jorja, go ahead and tell us just a little bit about yourself and your school district.
Well, I'm welcome. Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I have been here in Omaha Public Schools for about a decade. Prior to that, I was in another school district here in Nebraska for over 25 years. So I've been in the world of education, especially early childhood education, for the majority of my career, about 35 years. It's been a wonderful journey, and I especially enjoy being here in Omaha, Nebraska, because we are the largest urban school district in the state of Nebraska. And I think it's really important for you all out there to understand that, because oftentimes people assume that Nebraska, being in the heart of the United States, is a very homogeneous school, but we are not. We have over 150 languages spoken. We are a minority-majority district, and we're a very high needs district. So in our early childhood program, we are funded only by federal grants. We have some district support, and those federal grants require that we identify children at greatest risk for academic failure. And so when we start talking later today about digital literacy and technology use, it's incredibly important to me and a passion of mine to ensure that we have digital access to all members of our society. I have really strong beliefs about that, and Melissa and I will go down that journey together today.
Well, speak of that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the pedagogical history of technology in early childhood. You know,
Sure.
What's the typical, how has that usually been viewed in the past in the history of early childhood?
So it's really timely, because today we're having a professional development series with all of our educators on this very topic. And one of the mindsets that we have to shift in early childhood education is this belief that technology is bad. And that comes from really sound philosophical beliefs about how children learn. And I would argue too that children and adults learn in the same way, which is a very playful approach and a very inquiry-based approach. But in early childhood, we've been following that research for decades. And what we know is that children have to be engaging with one another socially. They need to be using hands-on materials. They need to be exploring, problem solving, creating, composing. They are not to be passive little learners that digest content. So back in the day, and you can probably figure out how old I am because I've been in the field for so long, our screens were very different than the screens of today. And, I like to tell the story of when I started evaluating children. We would always ask parents, does your child pretend to talk on a telephone? And it was about 15 to 20 years ago, a young parent said to me, no, they don't pretend to talk on a phone, which is an alarming statement, and because they can't pretend play. And she said, but they sure text. And that was kind of my first dawning.
Like that shifting of what media means to children. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
And so that began my evolution in thinking about it. But I will say to you also, though, when we saw this introduction of devices, it was alarming, because we saw a lot of children that were being engaged with a screen and not with an adult. And especially depending on the person's background and understanding, it's a very easy babysitter for a lot of children. And so when you have really staunch behaviorists like myself, early childhood belief is very strong that we need to kind of break that. So fast forwarding, Melissa, to our current status in Omaha Public Schools, we were not a one-to-one district. Right. And when we went into district closure back in March, it was astounding how many families not only didn't have any device, they did not have internet connection, and we had many families that didn't have an email address. So it really caused our district to reflect on, what do we need to do? Where do we go? So we were very fortunate that our district invested millions into getting an iPad for all and Melissa, you'll have to help me. Is that just for early childhood and elementary, or did the middle and high schools
No,
get?
entire district did adopt iPads. So yeah,
Okay.
Pre-K through 12.
Grade 12. Okay. And with that, as you can imagine, was a lot of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with these iPads, right? So when we went into remote learning, we first started out in baby steps. And so we had teachers doing live teaching, and or we would provide them asynchronous lessons. And so they got very comfortable with that. But then we noticed
similar like, years ago, PBS has like Mr. Rogers, it was kind of like that kind of environment, right?
It was more, exactly. It was more of live TV, quite honestly. People had ventured out and tried some applications like Seesaw and Dojo for communication with parents. And because a lot of our teachers are younger than myself and they have more experience with social media, they're very comfortable using those types of apps. And they found that they could communicate with some families that had phones much more easily than trying to communicate with them with a device. Now, the other thing that we're learning is that in early childhood, we are starting to see the things that we don't want to see, which is just children passively sitting in front of a screen, regardless if it's an iPad, if it's an interactive whiteboard, if it's an app on a phone or a television set.
Yeah.
We don't want that. We want engagement and interaction. So what we're doing.
Talking the other day about how that's that consumer culture, that we're trying to shift away from. Yeah.
Right. And that's what in the days of early childhood, back when I first started practicing, that was the very thing we did not want in any type of instruction, regardless if you use technology. We don't want passive learners. We want active learners. And so that's where those beliefs got really hard and fast, is let's not put children in front of screens. So I'm dealing with that now with some pretty strong thinkers, but today's presentation, professional development we're having today, is really exceptionally done. It's between the technology department that Melissa belongs to, our OPS technology trainers, and then some of our expert staff from the Buffett Early Childhood Institute here in Nebraska that have spent a lot of time working with the Erickson Institute out of Chicago to look at what is effective digital literacy look like for children. And so
before we dive into that, can you just take us back a little bit? We had talked the other day about this concept of Bloom's taxonomy and having how that evolves, how that helps that shift from that consumer culture to that creative culture.
Right. And that's the very topic of our PD today, excuse me. I think one of the biggest challenges always whenever we're trying to think about changing pedagogy in any content area, but especially in early childhood, sometimes we get mislabeled as being kind of, I don't want to use the word, but I'm going to, fluffy. All they do is play. And people don't understand what play is. And play really is, it used to be called the work of the child, but it really is a window into how children think. And so as an adult, if you listen to what they say and you watch how they recreate their world, that tells you a lot about their cognitive ability. And so a teacher's role in early childhood is to enhance and scaffold that play or that language through their interactions in a non-threatening, very engaging, active format. So when you think about Bloom's taxonomy, what it helps us do as early childhood educators is move us away from that low-level basic understanding up to the higher levels of application and synthesis. And people think early childhood students can't do that. Oh, yes, they can. When they pretend play, they are doing some very high level thinking. And what we're trying to help our staff learn today is technology is just the tool. You're a highly effective early childhood teacher. You know how to engage learning, but you want to use technology to capture that or to entice. And Melissa, we can talk about this a little later, how to be that mentor. Because they're the first experience in formal education is in early childhood. And if our teachers are using technology in a very fundamental way, as just a vehicle to digest by watching videos,
and that lower level of Bloom's,
then we're stuck there. And then we're reinforcing into parents that all children need to know is their alphabet, their letters, their shapes, and their colors. And if I do anything before I retire, it's I convince people that that's not what children need. I can't tell you how many children I test in various languages, they all know their colors because that's set in stone. But do really children need to know colors? Tell me what you know about green. And people will say, well, trees are green and leaves are green and fish can be green. Great. Tell me what you know about a locomotive. And people can go on and on with all this detail, right? So the point to that story is that we need to get children engaged in technology to broaden their background knowledge. So it's okay for them to watch videos. It's okay for them to listen to books, but let's use it from the lens of let's broaden their knowledge base. And then let's move them from that consuming up to the communicating and sharing aspect so that they are sharing with their friends their learning. So in this training this morning, we have a lovely photograph of two children sitting together with an iPad, and they're looking at a book or some other, you can't really tell what the screen is, but they are very much engaged in looking at it together. And the presenter shared the story of how they were sharing with one another about what they were seeing because the one of them had been very vested in it. And so that's what we want to see happening. We don't want to see children individually alone playing an app on an iPad. That's not where we want to go. And the next stage, of course, is then we want them to create. And so we have some videotape of one of our exceptional teachers who's a former actress, and she is recreating a play with the children. And so she videotapes them and audio records their languages. They're planning this play they're going to put on. And it's very free form. They didn't practice. They didn't retell something. They're just using their imagination. So that's one example. Yeah.
And so I think this brings up this concept as we help educators be less of that consumer culture and moving them into creator culture. This brings up the importance and the idea of a healthy media diet and how do we help our educators with that? What are you all doing to address that?
Well, I wish I could say to you I have the visual memorized, but I don't. There's a really good graphic, and you can find it on the Buffett Early Childhood Institute and their technology links.
We have a link, and we're going to throw it in the chat. So
all right.
Attendees will be able to access it.
Yeah. And I think the simplest way to explain it is just like a healthy diet. We have our fruits and our vegetables and our proteins and our grains, and then we have a little bit of junk food. And so they're using that same analogy to talk about access to technology for children. There's a little bit of junk food. They might play a little game on their iPad. That's great. That's fine. There's something they're learning, but we really want to broaden their diet so they're getting a little bit of everything. So it's not being perceived and used in the same way. And I'll use this example. When I go into some classrooms, I wonder because I see people using the iPad or an interactive whiteboard or any other form of technology similar to when I used reel-to-reel projectors. I hated to say that, but I thought that might bring a little bit of humor to the lesson.
I love my reel-to-reel projector. I'm just going to say it was great fun to anyways, but we'll not go there.
No, but my point just being is that was a form of technology, right? But it's also very passive. And here we have an interactive device like a whiteboard or an iPad that can give you all kinds of flexibility and creation. Could get that with my reel-to-reel, but I can with these tools. And so we just have to break that CD-ROM, that memory that people have, even in young minds that got passed down from generation to generation, that all we do with these really great things is just passively watch.
Yes.
Now, that's not to say that some people are really good at knowing how to introduce their iPads, but we have a ways to go. And we have some teachers that use their interactive whiteboards really well, but it's like anything, they're going to fall back on what they know. So,
right. Well, and I know like within our Common Sense resources, we have some great lessons that can help educators with helping develop those media habits that we want to be seeing with our children. Like the one that comes to mind is our Pause for People lesson for kindergarten. It's just a great way to help start and develop those great habits that like you said, breaking the old habits or what's even just kind of assimilated into our young children because they're watching the adults and how they're interacting with media. And so how can we start setting up some alternative options of that? And so that's where our lessons can really help facilitate that for educators.
Right. And I think that there's a notion in a very diverse culture like the one we're in, Melissa, where we've got families with different exposures to literacy, let alone digital literacy.
Yeah.
And I think about how we help them understand what's the most effective way to learn. And, you know, I used the analogy or the little story earlier, if I can get rid of everybody focusing on colors, shapes, and color, shapes, and numbers, I'm doing great. I'm just trying to help families understand. And I had this happen this week where a family member contacted me and was very concerned because she didn't see any educational apps on the iPad. And Melissa, as you know, we've been very careful about putting a lot of apps on there. I can't always control what happens in some individual schools, but when I go into a school in a classroom of early childhood students and I see each student individually on their iPad playing, I call it playing, and they are playing, they're exploring an app. But when I watch the rigor of that app, I'm like, maybe not so much. That I get worried because then children and adults then think, well, they're learning because look at this, they can match their letters and they can, count some objects and move them from the fish bowl or move the fish from the fish tank to the fish bowl, whatever. That's not learning to me.
And I think you bring up a good point of, how do we as educators vet those apps to really find, what's best? And that's one thing I really appreciate. Common Sense has their ed tech reviews, both for educators, but also for parents, so that you can really find apps that are going to meet those higher thinking needs versus being that lower level ones. And so that's really helpful and make it, because there's so much out there. There's just so many options, to go with. And so finding ones that really are going to be educationally sound are really important.
And I think that even if we use apps that are designed for a lower level of Bloom's taxonomy, they can be enhanced with the adult interactions or the student interactions. And that's the piece that, if we could help parents understand, and we do that even when we ask them to sit in on when their child is watching cartoons or movies or whatever it is, that's the key, because you have children and adults interacting and the adults expanding the language of that app or that video and building background knowledge and making connections to the child's life. That's what's really key. And it makes me smile. And if you all haven't seen it, I strongly encourage you to go to YouTube. And there's a great video of a man, I think this predates COVID by a few months. And he has a young toddler and they're sitting on the sofa.
And watching like something, and they're having this, and he's dialoguing with them and the kid's just babbling nonsense. It's the most adorable, but perfect example of that.
And the thing is, if you don't have an early childhood lens, you don't understand the power that father gave his child, because that child's in what we call a jargon stage of oral language development, which means the child knows to vocalize and to make sounds. And maybe in that child's mind, they're saying words, but we can't recognize them. But that dad is mapping meaning onto his child's jargon. And the child communicates very effectively with gestures and facial expressions and intonation. And the dad keeps this exchange going for quite some time. And the fun thing is they're viewing a television. But they're viewing some common series that I'm not too familiar with, that the father's really engaged with. And he's obviously done this before. And that's the really cool spirit of that, is that child knew exactly what he was doing with his dad. He started it and kept it going. That's what we want to see.
It's a great example of that. Well, I do see that we have a question, and a question about what are things educators should look for when choosing an app. I'll throw that out there if you want to put a pin in that. I also know that we wanted to kind of talk about, and we've kind of led into this whole idea about, as we make this culture shift, what are some of the things you mentioned today in OPS that you guys are actually today having a full day of PD on this topic? Maybe you could share a little bit about how to cultivate that digital storytelling within early childhood. What are some things that you all are doing in OPS that's really helping, create those parent-child interactions, or just really elevating children into that storytelling nature.
Okay, well, I don't know if I can talk at a very advanced technology level, but I'll share with you.
Just tell us about what you guys are doing. That's fine.
Okay, all right. So when I think of digital literacy, I think of a very broad definition, right? But when we talk about digital storytelling within an early childhood classroom, that is just an extension of what we believe and know to enhance a child's language development is to take them to the next level of story retelling or story creation. And that's so important for many reasons. Number one, of course, it's an early literacy skill, and it prepares the child for when they enter into more formal education because they understand story structure, they understand characters and setting. They might not be able to name it, but they know it when they start describing. So the importance of that in a child's oral language and literacy development is key. So when we talk about digital storytelling, we're really just thinking about how can we capture this and how can we entice it. So we might do something as simple as just video recording them with the iPad, but we might encourage a child to be the videographer.
So they take ownership then and agency of what they're going to show or tell or do.
Exactly. And there are other apps that the trainers did not mention today, and I have just a very small sliver of information about them. And Melissa, you might know more, like there's bookmaking apps, I believe, and there's some other kind of video creation apps where you can actually, children love, right? They love screens anyway. They're used to watching a lot of things, but how much fun to watch yourself and your classmates create this show. So that's kind of what the whole emphasis is on. And when we say that, it's not just so much that it's recorded. That's not the power. The power is the children are engaged in this exciting drama, and they have an adult facilitating them and expanding their knowledge and listening to them and asking them questions, but it's all being captured. And so there's a couple of beauties to that. The number one beauty is then when the children watch that empowers them and inspires them, and it triggers that inquiry of, oh my gosh, I'm on there. Like, what am I saying? And so they listen more, and then they can start talking to their colleagues and their friends, their classmates about what it is that they created and what it means to them. I tell another story that's not really a video recording, but this PD today was created out of some conversations between myself and some people on my team, and then our instructional coaches with people from the Buffett Center and Melissa's team. And we were having this discussion about should children have exposure to screens. And one of the coaches then took an idea that we had talked about and went back to our classroom and was sharing it with one of the teachers. And the teacher took the iPad outside, and all the children did was take photographs of trees because they were investigating the tree study in their curriculum. And she commented about how the ownership that these children took when they came back into the classroom. All they wanted to do was look at their photographs and talk about their photographs and what it meant to them.
Kind of taps into that concept that we were talking about purposeful play. I mean, it was like, okay, what interest did the child show, and then tapping into that interest.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and then
I know we could probably go on and talk about this. We're just kind of wrapping. This goes so fast, but I just wanted to point out, you're asked about apps and how to find them. I know Common Sense has some great lists curated about our top digital storytelling apps and creating book and storytelling apps. So I think we'll share that in the chat so others can access those.
And I would just add to that, Melissa, that the apps come out so quickly, right? There's so many that are being developed. But what I would say to people is really look at it for what its purpose is. If it's a low-level app and all it's doing is just getting a child to memorize or just identify, that's a low level of Bloom's taxonomy. You can do that with flashcards. There's no difference.
Right. And maybe it's the amount of time spent using that app versus the time spent using one of those higher level, thinking of it in the sense of balancing the time a little bit more intentionally. How much are you using that lower level one?
Yep.
Well, can you just really quick give us our top takeaways that we want to just kind of, before we wrap things up here?
Sure.
what are your top three here that you want to make sure everybody kind of thinks about today as we wrap this?
I want people to really understand that technology is an incredibly powerful tool, and used effectively, it's going to engage students at all levels, especially in early childhood. That's important for us to understand. But fundamentally, it's the teacher, it's the parent, it's the guardian, it's the family member, it's the peer that's going to enhance that child's development. The tool won't do that, but the tool will help provide intrigue and help provide agency or interest in learning. That's my one. My second one is the power that adults have in modeling. I don't know if we really understand that, but in early childhood, we live it and breathe it. Children learn by watching. And if you've ever been around a young child, you'll know that they do. And there's some darling examples when they will literally imitate every single thing you do. And they're listening.
Good and bad.
Good and bad. So it's really important that in our use of technology, they're watching us. And the example I gave you of the young mother saying, no, my child doesn't talk on a phone, but they know how to text. They pretend to text. So just thinking about everything we model. And you know, we could talk on, Melissa, but you think about adolescence and you think about social media and we think about some of the things we're dealing with there.
Laying that groundwork now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we are almost hitting our time. Just the last point that you want to make, and then we'll have to wrap it up.
Oh gosh, there's so many. I think that people need to really further investigate this idea of digital storytelling and really making sure that people understand that we don't want to get stuck in a lower level of blooms at understanding. We really want to push children regardless of technology, but technology will help us get there to do creation and communication and collaboration. And that to never think that because a child is 3, 4, or 5 years of age, and I would argue early childhood goes up to age 8, that they can't do those higher level things, because they can. They just need adults to scaffold it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. I'm just going to do a quick reminder to our participant. If you are interested in receiving acknowledgement or proof of attendance, there is a survey in the chat that's been added. And I don't know if we have any time for if there's any questions, we can just quick take any of those. Otherwise, just remember this conversation will be posted to our Common Sense YouTube channel, along with all the links and resources that Jorja mentioned that we discussed here today, and they will be shared out. So okay. Thank you so much, Jorja, for your time today. This was such a delightful conversation. I know both of our passions is early childhood and working with young children and helping develop the adults to be able to support that. So, all right. I think,
thank you.
Unless we have any questions in our chat, I think that concludes our session for today. Thank you all for joining us.
Yeah. Goodbye, everyone.